Hi, I'm Lisa Rubel from Love to Color My World, and I'm here to talk about the holidays. There's nothing better than stockings filled with candy, oranges, nuts, toys, maybe even new socks on Christmas morning. But there's maybe one thing better than a full stocking, and that is a homemade full stocking. I'm here today to walk you through the process of making a stocking using a pattern from Sit and Sew Fabrics and one of their 3-yard bundles of holiday fabrics. I'll show you how to make the basic stocking. This one actually happens to be reversible. And then I'll show you some options, including making a diagonally striped stocking and a patchwork stocking. So join me on this journey as we put together some stockings for the holidays. So when you're making a stocking, the first thing you need to do is decide which fabric goes where. These stockings are made out of 4 pieces plus the hanging loop, which we'll talk about at the end. You need to choose your fabric for the front of the stocking, for the back of the stocking, and for the lining, which also happens to be the cuff on both sides. For this project, you'll also need some sort of stiffener for the fabric. You can use fusible batting, you can use a mid-weight fusible interfacing, you can use regular batting and baste it to the fabric. It's up to you what you're most comfortable using, but that will give your stocking some shape so that it's not all droopy when it's hanging by the chimney with care and it's got its stocking shape. So I've chosen to use fusible batting for mine, and what I did was trace the stocking shape onto the non-fusible side of my batting and then position that onto my stocking front fabric. Now you'll notice that my fabric is a stripe, and it happens to be a directional stripe. You can see the trees on it that face up. If you're using a directional fabric, you want to make sure that when you trace it, you've got the directional shape pointed upwards. So my trees are pointing up on my stocking. So I've got that right. And if you have a stripe, you also want to just take a look to make sure that that straight line at the top is aligned with your stripes, so your stripes aren't kind of wonky. So get your shape traced onto your batting, get your oar interfacing, and get that affixed to your the wrong side of your fabric. Now the other thing you want to pay attention to is when you do the reverse side, you want to make sure that you flip the stocking template over. So you can see my 2 templates are reversed, so when I put them together and when I go to sew them, they will each be going in one direction. If you trace them both the same way, you won't make a stocking because you'll have toes going in opposite directions. So you're going to trace those onto your front and back. You can also trace out 2 and cut out 2 lining fabric stocking pieces. And now these, I like to do this with the fabric either right or wrong sides together and trace both at once, and that way I know that my toes are both pointed in the right direction. So before you cut the pieces for your stocking, just double check one more time that you've got your front and your back stocking pieces traced opposite each other, so that when you put them together, you've got right sides together and wrong sides out. Ask me how I know that that's something you should check one more time. It's so sad when you're excited to make a stocking and all of a sudden realize one of your pieces is backwards. At this point, once you have your pieces cut out, if you like, you can go back and add in some decorative quilting. You can do straight lines or wiggly lines or crosshatch or anything like that if you want to. It will just give your stocking a little more dimension and just a little extra interest, but it's totally optional. And then once you have your 2 stocking pieces for the outside cut out, put them right sides together so they match up, and go ahead and pin all the way around the outer edge. We'll be sewing these pieces together to make our outer stocking. And then we'll be doing the same with our lining pieces. So what I like to do, because the top edges of these get a little, they have a little more handling as we assemble the stocking, I like to backstitch at the beginning and the end to hold those seams in place, and then stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around the outside pieces of the stocking. Do the same for the lining pieces, except you want to leave a hole, and I like to leave it kind of at the bottom of the stocking, the bottom of the foot. You want to leave a 4 to 5 inch hole for turning the stocking right side out later in our process. Once you have both your outer stocking pieces and your lining pieces sewn together, our next step is to turn the outer stocking right side out. Now, after you do this, you may need to use a tool to get the edges nice and sharp and then press them. I like to press that right along the seam because then the back of the stocking stays on the back side and all we see on the front is the front side of the fabric. You often will need it in the toe as well. Run it along the edge and then press those seams so they stay nice and flat. And then we're going to tuck our pretty stocking front into the lining so that the right sides of the lining and the stocking are facing each other. So get that toe down into the toe section, and you want to align the raw edges at the top. And we're going to sew those together. So what I do is I pin at the seams on both sides. I press the seam allowance in opposite directions so that it lies a little bit more flat, and pin those 2 spots. And then we're going to pin the rest as well, aligning the raw edges and getting those fabrics together. The great thing about the cuff being part of the lining is that we're only 3 steps into the stocking and we're just about done. So now we're going to sew along the whole top edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we'll be turning it right side out through that opening you have in the bottom of the lining. Make sure when you do sew along this top edge that you don't accidentally sew through 2 layers. So I like to actually sew on the inside layer, and then I know where this top layer is so I don't actually accidentally sandwich them together. So now we're turning the stocking right side out, and while you've got the lining piece out and exposed, what you want to do is fold both of those edges around the opening under and either slip stitch or machine stitch it closed so that that hole goes away. That will be tucked deep inside the stocking, so as long as you use a matching color thread, you won't notice it at all. And once you've got that opening stitch shut, you want to tuck your lining inside, get the toe down into the toe section, and we're going to press this top edge. Now what we're ultimately going to do is fold the top edge over for a cuff. So if anything, you want to have a little bit of the lining showing on the outside, because that way when it folds over it will have a nice edge. Whereas if you have it the other way, when you fold it over, you'll still see the front of the stocking. So either have it lined up or a little bit of the lining showing, and give it a good press on both sides. Okay. And then to make the cuff, we're going to fold it over between 2 and 3 inches. You can decide how tall you want your cuff to be, and just kind of work with the fabric so that it's about the same width or height, I guess, the same height all across. And when you've got what you like for that height, give it another press. And here is our stocking. The last thing we need to do is add the little hanging loop. So to make the hanging loop, from one of your fabrics, cut a piece that is 3 inches by about 10.5 inches. And what we're going to do is to fold that in half, wrong sides together, and press. And then open it back up and fold each of the side edges in another time. And this will create a strap that has finished edges all the way around, so it's a really nice looking piece. And then fold it again on that original line. There we go. Then you're going to take this over to the sewing machine and you're going to sew a line around both long edges. With the ends, you can open it and tuck them in a little bit to create a finished edge on both ends. So I've got my loop strap made, and our very last step is to attach this to the stocking. Now I mentioned before that we've got a lot of layers of fabric here between having these pieces folded over and adding it onto these pieces. So if you do sew it by machine, just go very slowly because it's a real thick wad to go through. You can also stitch this by hand and not have to deal with making your machine go through so many layers. But what I like to do is to stagger, and it's hard to see because this is black fabric, but to not put the ends directly together, but to stagger them just to help kind of minimize the amount of fabric that's going through. And then you're going to go to the side of your stocking with the heel, not with the toe, and just position it right on that seam of the lining there and pin it in place. And then just stitch back and forth across that strap 3 or 4 times. So here's my finished stocking ready to hang by the chimney. A couple additional tips. If you're going to make more than one stocking, make sure that you position the stocking template the same time each way so that all of your stockings hang in the same direction. You don't have a couple going this way and one going this way. And because you're working with 3 1-yard cuts of fabric, consider mixing them up a bit and putting different combinations. Use a different one for the lining/cuff on one stocking and then a different front and back, and you can have a nice scrappy variety of stockings even just from using those 3 fabrics. I hope you have fun making a stocking and then of course filling it with all kinds of holiday goodies.